In January last year, 18-year-old Sidney McIntyre-Starko died of fentanyl poisoning at her University of Victoria dorm room. Her parents raised concerns about the response of UVic campus security and how long it took to administer Narcan and CPR. The case led to an independent investigation and a broader discussion at post-secondary institutions. A coroner's inquest was also called to understand the procedural failures in the teen's death. And this morning, the jury issued its recommendations. CBC reporter Karin Larsen joins me now. Hi, Karin.
Hi, Michelle.
Can you remind us first of this very sad case surrounding the death of Sidney McIntyre-Starko?
Sidney McIntyre-Starko was an 18-year-old first-year student at UVic in December of 2024. She and two friends, and a very strange story, it would take a long time to explain it, came into the possession of a vial of drugs. Now, they say they didn't know what was in this vial of drugs, but they decided to take it anyway. So one early evening, they went into their dorm bathroom and snorted the powdery substance that was in this vial. It turned out to be fentanyl. Now, Sidney McIntyre-Starko, one of the other students, fell unconscious pretty quickly after that, and the third student phoned 911. Sidney was the one who went into the most medical distress, I guess you could call it. 911 was called, campus security attended, but Starko McIntyre did not make it. She ended up dying from the fentanyl that they had taken that night. You know, the inquest heard that this was her first time taking this kind of street drug, and it seemed to the parents that her death was not only tragic but also preventable, which is how we ended up at this inquest.
And one of the main concerns was the handling of the 911 call. We have tape of that call. I just want to give a warning that we are about to play some of it, and it may be disturbing for some. Karin, can you explain first what we're about to hear and what it illustrates?
Right, so I've edited this down, Michelle, this clip, and so one of the concerns raised was that it took 3.5 minutes from the start of the 911 call for the 911 call operator from BC Ambulance to establish the location of where McIntyre-Starko and the other student had fallen unconscious. Now, they lived in a dorm called Sir Arthur Currie Student Residence, which is on the UVic campus. It's been there since 1967, but the 911 operator couldn't locate it on her map. And so it takes 3.5 minutes to nail down where, you know, potentially the operator was going to send an ambulance. That didn't happen right away either. And it's only after 3.5 minutes that the 911 operator asked what the problem is. Now, the problem with that is someone who's overdosing on fentanyl, what will happen first is that they will stop breathing, and then they will start suffering brain damage because there's no oxygen going to the brain, and then they will die from a heart attack. Anyway, let's listen to the clip I cut of the 911 call now.
BC Ambulance, for what city?
Victoria.
What's the address?
It's Sir Arthur Currie. We live in the UVic residences.
Okay, let me just see here. I'm just looking at the residence locations here. So what is it called?
It's Sir Arthur Currie, and it's off of Lot 5.
Arthur Currie? Lot 5?
Arthur Currie.
Okay.
And
hold on one second here. I gotta find you first. I just don't see that building on my map. Has Robert Wallace.
Do you want me to respell it?
No, I just mean like I just don't see it here off of Lot 5. Maybe it's just not one of the ones labeled on my map here.
Oh.
Yeah, so Michelle, you can just hear from that the confusion. As I said, that was edited down. It took 3.5 minutes before the 911 operator asked what the problem is, because she can't locate where the student residence is. As it turns out, it doesn't really have a civic address, and this is true of a lot of buildings on university campuses, that everyone on campus knows where they are, but they don't have an actual civic address. And the 911 operator actually testified in front of the coroner that on her map, all the buildings, all the resident buildings just look like gray boxes. And so that caused a delay in response for the ambulance getting there. And that could have been obviously a critical problem with the response to the overdose.
And as Sidney's parents, as I mentioned, were very vocal in their criticism There have been changes made at post-secondary institutions. What led to this coroner's inquest?
Well, those criticisms, many of them were directed at how campus security officers responded. They were called. They did attend the scene. They do have first aid training. They do carry naloxone. But because there was 2 students who were unconscious and turning blue, we heard testimony about that, and also having seizures, which can happen in drug overdoses, they didn't immediately give the Narcan or diagnose what the problem was. It also didn't help the 3rd student didn't immediately tell that they had taken drugs. She said when she testified that she was worried she would get in trouble. That information was divulged a little bit later. But overall, what we hear in the response is just this delay in actually, figuring out or responding. And so it took 12 minutes before Narcan was administered to the 2 students that had passed out, including McIntyre-Starko. It was probably too late at that point for her. And then it took a total of 15 minutes before CPR was started. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, chest compressions can keep a person alive by oxygenating the blood and pumping it, to some degree through the body to keep the brain alive and keep, oxygen moving through the blood. But that didn't happen, and it was too late. And there was also one other issue we should mention is the ambulance did show up. It did take McIntyre-Starko to the hospital, but when she got there, they didn't know who she was. She wasn't identified. The BC ambulance attendant did not know her name. The university didn't follow through on that. So she was in the emergency department at Royal Jubilee Hospital as an unidentified person. Her mother, Caroline McIntyre, is an emergency room physician here in the Vancouver area. And she testified on the first day, and it was just incredibly heartbreaking how her daughter was essentially dead in the emergency room at Royal Jubilee, and no one knew. The family wasn't informed because the hospital didn't know who this person was, and the university didn't follow through, even though it did put out a statement afterwards that it had in fact, informed the hospital who this person, that in fact was not true. And so there was a lot of discrepancies in information around this tragic incident.
And so today, what have been the findings this morning, Karin?
Well, following up on everything we've talked about, one of them was for universities to have civic addresses on buildings to make it clearer where emergency responders can go to, and that this information should be widely shared and widely publicized on the building, within campus as well, and on maps. So that's a pretty straightforward one there. There were actually 10 recommendations in total, and they span, the target being from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education, BC Ambulance. One of them was that there should be a timer on when calls come in to when the call taker actually gets to the issue, because 3.5 minutes, I think, as a lot of people would agree, before you ask what the emergency is an unacceptable amount of time, especially when someone's not breathing and unconscious.
We'll have much more throughout the day here, of course. Karin Larsen, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
CBC reporter Karin Larsen. And again, those recommendations issued just this morning from the coroner's inquest looking into the death of a UVic teen at her dorm room last year.